Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson. Thank you for joining me. So today we have a show that is part of our Joyful Art of Business series. And of course, that's this all-encompassing idea that what we're doing with our professional endeavors, whether they're paid or volunteer, whether we're at the beginning of our professional career, in the middle, or at the end, that we should measure, assess, care about, pay attention to the concept of our return on investment in terms of our emotional and psychological response. In other words, my professional endeavors are an art, right? They take our individual creative talents and input, and when we're practicing, right, this art of business, we should be joyful. Not joyful every moment of every second of every day, but overall, we need to include an assessment of our emotional and psychological perspectives and outcomes when we look at what we do with our time that we spend in our work. So we're practicing the joyful art of business, and our specific show today is I am bored. Is this all there is to life? Now, this is a show that is very intriguing to me. It's one of the many times, many of the things that we talk about, and we're so many different series and programs, because I'm trying to make sure that I'm sharing as much information as I can and solutions, and of course everything I do is all about helping people surpass their goals. But one of the things I was saying that was so intriguing to me about this specific show is that I personally very rarely have experienced in my life the feeling that I'm bored. Very rarely. And I tend to have the opposite problem personally, my own anecdotal experience, where I'm overwhelmed because I put a lot on my plate, and I tend to do this with my volunteer work. I tend to do it in my social time. I tend to do it with my professional work in any field. So I have the opposite problem, and so that's why it's really interesting to me. And in fact, when I was looking at all the different recording schedules and show episodes coming up, I was thinking, I never really experienced this. I don't feel really bored. And part of it, of course, if you explore all the different programs we put forward and all the different professional services that we provide, it may seem, in fact, that I get feedback a lot from people. People say to me, how do you do all of this, right? And so it sort of makes sense, I guess, that I'm not bored. And part of what that I think is really interesting is some of the tools and the techniques that I use, why I'm never really honestly where I can say to somebody accurately I'm bored, I think is something that makes me feel comfortable in this episode. So even though it's not something that I personally experience, but the reason I don't experience it, my assertion is, the boredom, is because I do a lot of things to structure my life so that's not even a possibility. And I'm instead on the other end of the spectrum dealing with, how do I get from, one part of the world to another part of the world on a 15-hour flight, and then I'm working on this project and that project, and then I've, got this volunteer task. And so, again, like I said, it's not luck. And part of the reason that I, again, feel fascinated by this topic, but also really comfortable in being a credible source, is that I've set my life up so that I'm not bored. So let's talk about how this happens and what it is and the toll it can take, and some of the tools and techniques that I utilize that may help you begin to craft and address issues in your own life to ensure that if you don't want to be bored, that you never are. So in the show notes, I just wanted to point out a couple of things about this topic that it's, somewhat embarrassing. People will tell me, whenever I do programs about this, we have seminars, people say to me, I don't even want to admit this, right? Who wants to sit in a climate-controlled building with clean water and, in a part of the world where we have access to enough food to sustain us, sometimes even more, and sit around having discussions about people being bored as an adult, right? But it's a very real and global situation that people get into. And in fact, it's interesting because when I was sort of working through preparing for this program, I started to think about one of the places where I hear from people so much that they claim they're bored is their jobs, A. But the other place is, as an attorney, as a lawyer, I used to practice all types of general legal issues at my firm, and I handled quite a few family law cases, right? So divorces. And one of the things that people say is the reason that they're getting divorced is they're bored. And what they usually don't use that word, but they'll say things like, we've grown apart, I don't feel that this relationship is helping me grow, things like that. And so I would argue that you just can't be dismissive of this. It's not sort of like, we all know when we're around, really little kids sometimes, little kids will, on a long car ride or something, and they'll start saying, I'm bored. Well, they're a little kid. And so that's why we're supposed to make sure that they have enough toys and everything set up so they're on schedule, so they can have something to play with, something to keep their time and attention, and then, of course, be right on schedule for whatever nap or rest time it is. So that's one thing, and I don't want to dismiss, again, this very real issue for a lot of adults all over the world. All over the world, I've had people dialogue and share with me about these issues, and it's not something that only impacts people, who are like, senior executives and wealthy, beyond, imagination. This is something that impacts all kinds of people at every level of life. And part of it, we think about that midlife crisis, right? Just sort of, we're not the little kid in the back of the car any longer on some long ride saying I'm bored. We're not the 20-year-old sort of maybe excited at everything that's happening because it's all kind of maybe the first time, that we've lived away from home or had a full-time job or started a family. And at some point, depending on where you are, and again, this is, researched and written about, and it impacts all types of things in life, people's families and careers. People claim they're bored, right? The midlife crisis, I'm bored. Is this all there is? So it's something that whether or not I personally struggle with it or have struggled with it to this point, who knows what the future holds, and the argument that a lot of people make is, how can you say you're bored, really? There's people that starve, there's people that are dealing with natural disaster, there's people that, aren't even able, physically because they may have an illness or a disability, and you have the nerve with your privilege to claim that you're bored? And again, I want to, here in this foundational part of the episode, say, yes, you can simultaneously be aware that you're in a very fortunate position to have access to, clean water, enough food or quality food, to be able to have shelter, to be able to have even some nice extra treats, and still have the reasonable argument that at some point your needs aren't being met. And so at a basic level, that's what this is about. All right, so in the show notes, I just shared an Oxford dictionary definition. Right, what does it mean to be bored? According to the dictionary, feeling weary because one is unoccupied or lacks interest in one's current activity. All right. So this isn't a character flaw, right, with some privileged person who doesn't have the ability to understand that they have some wonderful things in their lives. But what it is that, and I'm honing in on this, that one is unoccupied or lacks interest in one's current activity, right? So not that I'm some fatally flawed person if I feel like I'm bored. It just means that in this current activity, I'm unoccupied or I lack interest. It may be because I've done it so many times, right? It may be that every day sort of seems like the day before and the month before and the year before, and the only thing that changes maybe is the date, and I get up and I do the same thing every day, and it's repetitive, and there's nothing exciting or engaging or wonderful about it. And that is, again, a very reasonable thing. One, humans compared to historically as a species, right? When we were out hunter-gatherers, we didn't have a lot of time for boredom because we spent all of our time just trying to procure enough food to keep us alive, and we didn't live very long. Our lifespan was very short, right? But we built these elaborate societies, which I really hope that there's a record as long as possible in the future for future whatever forms of life or species to study us. I think that it's relative to what we understand. I think it's amazing what we've done, right? Just as humans, we built structures, and then we built structures that can protect us from the climate, and we built structures in almost every part of the world, right? You know, whether it was something that would have been humans couldn't live in that environment due to the cold or due to the heat, we found a way, right? And we've done this, and we've built these lives, and we've extended our lifespan, and in many ways we're constantly trying to come up with ways to eradicate other illnesses and other things that may negatively impact us. And so we do all of this to create this sort of longer period of life that's more, quote, comfortable, right? And then it's not unusual or not unexpected that you run up against this thing of people claiming they're feeling the current activity isn't really doing anything for them emotionally, right? And so that's often why I mentioned a few minutes ago that in family law, people say this, you know, right, I've grown apart. They don't, and then divorce, but many people go right back out and find someone else and remarry. It's not that they feel like the idea of being in a committed relationship isn't for them. It's just that they felt like with that person they couldn't grow anymore. So it's the same thing with jobs. Especially with people who have the skills and the confidence, they'll leave a situation and say, you know, and basically there was nothing wrong, right? And they just were bored. They wanted something, a new adventure, a new challenge. And you hear to jobs all the time. People say to me, there's nothing, you know, I'm at the top of what I can do here. There's no other opportunity in terms of, you know, a job challenge or skill or pay level. I'm sort of maxed out at what I can do. I'm at the top of whatever available opportunities are here. And it's not, you know, and I don't want to just sit here for the next, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 years and just do this. And that's, again, so what can we do about it? My argument is even if individually or anecdotally it isn't something that we personally experience or have experienced, and even if it's something that there's an argument, hey, how can you claim you're bored, right? You're privileged. I'm still arguing that there's credible reasons why people experience this in modern times, and that the consequences of people divorcing or leaving their organization, the disruption, sometimes the pain that's caused in a lot of this is something that's a consequence of this unexamined issue. Someone not examining, saying, "I'm bored. Is this all there is to life?" Then it can be just incredibly, destructive, right? What happens to the young child who, through no, action of their own, they lose a very important daily life with a family member because of this. So my argument is that the consequences of this situation, of this outcome, can be so negative that it's worth us doing everything we can to come up with some ways and some solutions to make sure it does not happen. And if it does happen, how can we effectively address it early enough, right? So that the little molehill doesn't become a mountain, right? That we address it when it's a tiny issue or just the beginning of a potential issue, and we address it, and then that way it doesn't spread or grow into something that becomes just overwhelmingly destructive. So here we are. We are not going to beat up on ourselves anymore for claiming that we should be grateful. We are grateful. I said a little while ago, you can simultaneously, at the same time, be fully aware that, yes, it's wonderful. It's wonderful that we're alive in this time and that we're not hunter-gatherers. It's wonderful that we're alive in this time and we have access to everything from, science and medicine and all these things and the societies and air conditioning or heating or all this. It's great. We still have the ability, reasonably, credibly, to want to feel that we are living up to and beyond our potential. And that's the key of so much of, again, the fundamental principle of everything I do, right? How can I surpass my goals? And why is that important? Well, it's because people, we are creative, we're inquisitive. You wouldn't be here with me and taking part in the program if you didn't care, if you weren't interested. And we are. And I've talked to so many people from, so many different types of backgrounds around the world. we are unique and interesting, and we have the right to invest in asking ourselves, what is my maximum capacity? Am I able to do more than I thought I was? And most of the time the answer is yes, right? And so people do this in physical endeavors. They start off, they say, I've never run in my life, and then they do 3 kilometer or 5 kilometer, and then they're doing marathons, and then they do triathlon, right? They just keep stepping it up because it's like you learn you can do more than you ever thought you could do. And it's like that with everything else in life. One of the tools that I think is helpful in the show notes, I have a quote from a former First Lady of the United States, and Eleanor Roosevelt. So there's a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, and the quote says, "One thing life has taught me: if you are interested, you never have to look for new interests. They come to you. All you need to do is be curious, receptive, eager for experience. And there's one strange thing. When you are genuinely interested in one thing, it will always lead to something else." Now, this quote, and I have to say, I'd seen this several years ago, and recently I came across it again. But I've lived, and I'm going to frame this in a very positive way. I have always wanted to try, to the best of my ability, to get in as much as I can in life. As I alluded to earlier, I tend to have a problem of having too much on my plate because I like to get out there in life and make it happen and do it. And there's a lot of things that I've done and learned the hard way that I've handled how I do that in the wrong way. But being positive and big picture, without even having ever seen this quote as a young person, I figured out that your sort of genuine passion and interest and just sort of life, right? Curiosity. I wonder why the sky is blue. I wonder why, whatever. Just that interest and asking those questions and really learning, right? I remember when I was a really young kid, I got into clouds, like a lot of young people do. Clouds. You look in the sky, right? You look at the clouds. The different types of clouds, the different shapes. It's interesting. And then I went and read a lot about it and learned about all the different types of clouds, or cirrus clouds and cumulus clouds, and I was interested. And then later when I went to college, I actually took a class of meteorology, which was fascinating to me because I'm interested. I learned more about clouds, and all I'm saying is there's nothing to do with what I do professionally. It wasn't anything that I wanted to necessarily do as a job, but I'm just curious about the world, right? Like, it's interesting. I'm here. I might as well see and taste and touch and smell and watch and everything I can as long as I can. That's sort of been my big picture goal. Again, haven't always handled it well in terms of time management, organization, things of that nature, but I understood the essence of this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt before I'd even laid eyes on it. And the idea is simply this: if you're interested and curious and passionate, then that interest and passion, it's going to apply, and and as the quote says, you don't have to look for new interests. They come to you. They just come to you. And it's true. And I think the key is going back to that most very young children have this, right? It's that sort of talkative phase. Why is the sky blue? Why is the water that color? Why, why? And some people, and then again, I don't have my own children, so I've only been able to experience the joy of other people's children, and I've never been in it to the point where I've found those questions to be, incessant, but again, fairness, like I haven't been, a parent or a full-time caregiver. But that's that essence of what you got to get back to. You have to be interested. And part of the reason it makes sense when we're little is we're new. You've only been here, a while, a few years. So when you start to be able to verbalize stuff, you're curious. What's going on? Where are we? I've never been here. What's this? What? Of course, when we get older, we lose that. If we let it happen. And, of course, there's a whole bunch of programs and resources around the world about getting back to your child within and, playing and all, bringing that into your adult life. So this is not something that there's a lack of resources. If this is triggering in you more desire for research and trying to find out what can you do to kind of get back to that childlike wonder. Okay. The other part of it is many of the times people that we label nerds or geeks or, you hear people and they'll say, oh, they're so intense, or they're really just so into everything. That's the same passion and intellectual curiosity and wonder, right? So that group is, and I'm happily, proudly a nerd, a geek, whatever, a dork, whatever the current term is. I just love this kind of stuff, and I talked about it. Not that much, but because I'm, pretty shy and was very shy growing up. But, if anyone spent any time with me and I felt comfortable around him and talked about my interests, then I have a lot of interests. Like I said, it could be, literally everything from clouds to coins to, pop music. It doesn't matter. It's just I'm curious. And when I get into things, I want to read about it. I'm interested. I want to get all that I can. I get really, excited, and I get sort of just, it's a rush. There's no other way to explain it. When I'm learning something new. I actually was reading an article this morning. I read every morning, we get up and we do sort of our get ready for the day. And one of the things I do every morning is read. I read a couple of, global newspapers. I read some other specific professional types of outlets I'm interested in, so legal issues, education, business, of course. And, I'm always thinking. And I was reading something just this morning, and I read about something I had never heard about. And, of course, I was so excited. I thought, wow, I never heard of this. And then that led to, quite a bit of my free time in the morning period that was taken up investigating this thing I had never heard of. I was like, wow, I never, ever heard of that. Fascinating. So some of you may have done a more overt job of holding on to this sort of wonder at the world, and that's sort of why you've gotten or did get the feedback growing up. You're kind of a nerd or a band geek or whatever, a theater geek nerd or whatever. But here's the thing, that's great. You just had very specific interests, and you were willing to take part in either activities or be around other people that shared them, and that's awesome. As an adult, I think that people get so caught up in, and I've done so many other programs on this, and I'll keep having to do it, but people get so caught up in, this sort of weird obsession with what other people think of them, that they let that start to dictate, I think, their own decisions, which is silly. Other people don't think of us at all that much. There's tons of science on it. People think about themselves. So for all the obsession that people put into, well, I don't want to take that job. What will my family think? What will other people think? What will my neighbors think? I don't want to go and take part in that hobby or do that, activity. What will people think? Who cares? They're not thinking about you at all. When they do think about you, it's a little teeny tiny bit, and it's mostly about themselves and how you relate to them. And it's, it's such an odd thing to me. If you think you're bored, my argument is then that is a red flag that you are not making good choices in your life. I also want to, as underscores I have in many other programs, you cannot play the victim and try to put the responsibility on someone else to get in your head, listen to your own internal sense of wonder, and then manifest that in the world. In other words, you can't say, well, my spouse, I don't know what to say. I can't grow with them anymore. They're not doing anything. Look, you're responsible for your own sense of wonder, for your own interest and passion. That's totally in your head, and it's totally motivated, controlled by you. Other people don't even know what you're thinking. So it's unfair, it's disingenuous, and it's being a victim, right? And trying to put responsibility for something that's 100% in your area onto another person. So I'm going to write no one else is responsible for this. This is you. Now your spouse is responsible for their own sense of wonder, and are they feeling bored in their own life? But they have nothing to do with what you're doing. And you do see this. You'll see it in people, and you can see usually people are sort of heading in, quote, different directions, right? So, I actually was watching a television show, and the people were older people, and meaning I think they were like in their 70s or something, right? And so they've been married like I don't know, 50 years. And so what started to happen is one spouse got like all these new interests, like started doing, I think, like some art or painting or something, and then started like going to all these different classes and meeting new people and traveling to go to like more, different type of activity, but this new exciting thing they were doing. And then the other person in the relationship was not doing anything differently and wasn't interested in joining their spouse with their sort of new passion, and then just sort of sat around and complained all the time that the person was gone and they were lonely and why were they changing, and it was so counterproductive. It's a healthy, awesome thing to see somebody else invest in their own joy, right? That's the greatest thing ever. And when you care about somebody in any capacity, much less that you love them, right, and you've been married to them for however long, their happiness is your happiness. So it's the most illogical thing you've ever heard of. You're responsible. If you feel like you're bored, then you need to listen to that feeling, that nagging feeling, and turn it all the way up in volume, because it is a warning sign you are in trouble. You're in trouble in your personal relationships, and you're in deep trouble with your career, because you're going to start, quote, phoning it in, and everybody knows when you start phoning it in. We see that a lot with people who have very specific types of talent, professional athletes, entertainers, where they've reached a certain point. Certainly, of course, they won every award you could imagine. They're beyond famous and wealthy or whatever, and somebody will go to their concert or one of their sporting events and say they're phoning it in. There's no passion there at all. Everyone can see when you don't care. Everyone can see when you're bored. They can certainly see it if you're someone who has a very specific type of job in an arena or auditorium. They can tell that person is not excited to sing that song. They can also tell it, though, I want you to understand this, at your job, right now. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're working in a entry-level, part-time, food service job. People can tell. Everyone can tell. Every single person, just like somebody sitting in an audience can tell, that person on stage is not at all into this. They do not want to be here. They are bored. They are over it. They would rather be anywhere else. It's the same thing in whatever else it is you do. And the customer, right? I go to the dry cleaners or a restaurant and I get somebody who they are totally bored, right? Oh, can I help you? So now I feel, or worse than that, they won't even do that. Depending on where you are, hey, excuse me, I'm standing here. Can somebody help me? I'm in your business. Look, you don't need to go spread that sort of numb, boredom, misery to other people. There's no reason for it, and it's not justifiable at all. You don't know what other people's lives are like, so why would you go into their space and now make something that shouldn't have been that difficult, dealing with whatever your professional activity is or your volunteer task, or in your family and friends? Why do they have to have their entire life brought to a negative situation because you feel that everybody else should be as miserable as you are? You chose this. The moment you feel bored, that means you need to go ahead deep in your own inside. So you need to sit somewhere quietly. I don't care if you have a toilet or a closet or a corner somewhere, and it needs to be quiet. You need to go in your own head, and you need to just seriously sit and think about what is interesting to me. I don't care what it is. I seriously don't care. It could be something, professional and more substantive. It could be some silly thing that has nothing to do with anything of substance, but it's something that's interesting to you. You need to go in your head and figure that out. And then you need to get in your life and you need to start doing things about it. And I don't care if you need to go online and start reading what other people who are interested in that have posted, because I guarantee you there's not a thing in the world that you could think of that there's not at least some other person in the world who has an online community for just that thing. Go to that place and start reading. Then, if there's some way in physical space that you want to take part in this, or you want to take part in a virtual world with people online, you want to go to a meetup with people, you need to take responsibility to do the things that are wonderful, potentially interesting to you. And the passion and excitement that you have for something, it does ebb and flow. So you may get into one thing and think, oh, I was so excited. I loved reading all about and going to those things all about gardening. The gardening was so cool. And then a few months later, you might feel like, okay, I've learned all that I wanted to know, and I'm now over this. That means I'm ready to go for my next thing. And as the quote said from Eleanor Roosevelt, once you start doing this and being passionate and talking to people, it does come to you. It really does, because you're talking to other people, and then or, online in real physical space, and they're sharing something, or you're reading one thing, and then while you were reading that one thing, there's something else in there, and you think, I never even thought about that, or wow, that's interesting too. Before you know it, it does lead. One thing leads to another. The curiosity is just the conduit for it. Right? For the wonder and the joy. And all you got to do is just open up that sort of floodgate. It literally is like, just imagine, right? There's a floodgate holding back the water, and and behind the floodgate is all I'm bored. This is so routine. Every day's the same. Nothing changes. Is this all there is to life? Yeah. If this is all that you want there to be to your life, then it will be. And you'll do the same routine, boring thing forever. And then at some point, to the best of our knowledge at this point, your physical body is going to stop functioning. Your heart and your breathing, and you're going to die. Your body's going to die. So, that's the answer to it. Is this all there is? Yeah. If this is what you want, meaning you're not going to change any of your behavior, this is what you get. And there's nothing that magically is going to happen. It doesn't. I mentioned the midlife crisis earlier. It doesn't magically happen. There's not a single age. And there's a ton of stuff, out in the world, right? The midlife crisis year to be careful is in your, 31, or it's 47, or it's 55, or it's 63. No, look. What do you want? If you want to stay in a place where you are bored, stay there. Nobody else is responsible. Not your spouse, not your family, not your friends, not the town you live in, not your job, not your boss, not your coworkers. Nobody. You. You made this. If you recognize this situation, the feeling, the boredom, that there's not the challenge, that the current activity is not one that's engaging you, then you have got to take action. I just went through a list of ways you can do it. You can read. You can just look at stuff online at pictures. You can go in physical real life. You can be in a virtual world. I don't care how you do it. You must take action. If you do not take any action, then you have made the choice by refusing to do anything different that, yes, your tomorrow is going to be probably exactly the same as today and the day after that. This is your life. Yours. You alone. I beg you to take this very seriously. I'm never bored, as I said, because I have so many different passions and interests, and I'm so fascinated by just the world that I'm learning new stuff constantly, and I'm always interested and excited. And I try to do different things with my paid work, with my volunteer work. I'm always interested in learning things, so I'm often, taking a class or a program, often academically, for credit. Sometimes it's for licensing, but why not? Geez, why not learn? And then I love a lot of, things that are just mindless pop culture. I went to a movie the other night with a friend of mine, and it was a silly comedy, and it was hilarious. And I enjoyed it. And you know what? I'm not bored. I have too much on my plate, which is a lot of other programs that I'm doing to work on, right? Take on too much, got to learn to cut back, things of that nature. Nobody's going to get everything done in life, and that's what I struggle with, realizing that no matter how much I do, of course there's so much I'll never see in this world. But that's okay. That's just the nature of the lifespan. I really appreciate you joining me today. As always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information to join into our community. And again, as I close, I beg you, I implore you, please, if you feel bored, then you need to make the change. I don't care what it is. I don't care how you do it. Other people who care about you, your happiness is their joy. Get out and figure out, and then go do whatever it is that's interesting. Thank you so much for joining me, as always, and I hope that you have a great rest of today.